I'm going to try to move through a little bit rapidly, just so we can have as much time as possible for discussion and questions. And maybe I can amplify on some of these points if I deal with them too elliptically here. As Warren noted, I write this column for Slate called History Lesson. The title was invented by Michael Kinsley, and I always tell people it's ironic because, you know, as a professional historian, I don't really think history teaches us lessons in the ways that the media commonly use that notion. And what this column is supposed to do is to try to expand our knowledge or our thinking about contemporary issues by opening up a historical window, the context, background, perspective that often is, I think, lacking from contemporary debates. I came to this sort of as a journalist. I'd been a journalist for a number of years before starting graduate school, and somewhat fortuitously, Slate magazine began around the time I began graduate school. I came to New York for Columbia University. I had known some of the folks from having worked at the New Republic magazine, and Slate was started with a bunch of New Republic refugees. So I was able to kind of continue that, which, you know, was altogether necessary as a graduate student in New York City. You can't really get by even on a stipend. So this was a way for me to continue my work in journalism, make some money, and started off editing for the magazine. But then at a certain point, I saw first this actually kind of surprising interest among all manner of people in history, you know, whether it was the History Channel, whether it was you know, op-ed pieces dealing with history, that there seemed to be a craving for more history in our public debate. At the same time, I saw friends who, really with no qualifications other than a law degree, established themselves as legal journalists, and they would sort of write with the same authority of the most advanced law professors about, you know, Supreme Court cases, and the fact that they, you know, were fresh out of law school gave them a kind of cachet. And I thought, oh well, maybe I can do this with history as I begin my PhD. And Michael Kinsley liked it and blessed it, and we were off to the races. Academic versus popular history. A lot of people see this gulf, this gap, as a matter of professors versus journalists, professionals versus amateurs. But I think that sort of breaks down on closer inspection. I think some of the popular history that many of us deride has been done by academics like Stephen Ambrose, many of whose later works, you know, were not at all you know, rigorous academically and were exceedingly popular. You know, another figure, controversial, Warren has expressed admiration. I find myself rather less admiring. Howard Zinn is a figure, you know, reaches an enormous public audience, but, you know, I would question the academic merits of his people's history. And Michael Kazin has done this brilliantly, actually, in an essay in Dissent. By the same token, there are many wonderful journalists, Taylor Branch, Neil Gabler, the late Anthony Lucas, who write academic, you know, history that any academic would be proud of, that we all assign in our classrooms. And then there are figures like Gary Wills or Doris Kearns Goodwin, who have PhDs but are, you know, Wills is in classics, Goodwin was in political science. Where do they fit in this academic versus pop journalist or professional versus amateur dichotomy? So I sort of want to just put that aside. It doesn't matter whether you have a PhD or where your occupational home is. What really matters is the kind of work you do. Then there's the monograph versus synthesis debate. And Tom Bender sort of famously wrote his article many years ago on the need for synthesis and whole versus parts. And to some degree, you know, there's something to this. Obviously, work that is too monographic, that too isolated, is not going to find a wider research, a wider readership. But there are also wonderful micro-histories, both of the academic and journalistic variety. There are many ways to take small topics and open them up so that relevance can be established, interest can be established without feeling like you have to do something broad canvas in the kind of David McCullough variety. A third dichotomy, that again, each of these I think has some validity, but is insufficient to answer the problem. Conservative political history versus radical social history, right? So here the notion is, until the 60s came along with kind of fracturing the field and destroying these master narratives that privilege, great white male political, diplomatic, military actors, there was this kind of fusion between history that academics did and what the public liked to read, which is actually false. I mean, back in the day there were, lots of problems that academics always have had in reaching the public, and that, so this is a more timeless debate. And then, so from one side of the aisle, the argument is, well, these narrow histories, whether it's, based in race or gender or any other, sort of newer form, are kind of ignoring the broader picture, or flip it around, and it's just this kind of conservative veneration of great white male heroes like the founding fathers of we've had in popular history. But I'd also like to kind of blow that apart, because I think, there's many instances of, what's now a 40-year-old new social history that, are wonderful and in their ability to reach broad audiences that speak to more than just fellow historians in arguing that we've got to expand the field. That battle was fought and won a long time ago, and I think that kind of remains a sort of anachronistic kind of way of cutting this problem. I'll just have two more here. One, narrative versus analysis. I cited Tom Bender before. Lawrence Stone, 1979's essay about the need to return to narrative is the one everybody always cites. It's a call that's been repeated, every other year for 30 years now. Oh, we need more narrative history. And, of course, narrative history can have a sort of broad appeal that it's hard to have if you don't have good stories and good characters. But look, Richard Hofstadter didn't write narrative history. There are a lot of C. Van Woodward's stuff in his day wasn't narrative. There's many historians who can reach the public without primarily structuring their work in a sort of traditional storytelling mode. I think, again, it's a false dichotomy. It can be helpful sometimes to think whether one needs more stories, one needs better ways of presenting one's information. But again, too simplistic a way of framing it.